Chapter 10. Raymond had to see Windchaser, and that meant sneaking away from camp. Raymond had waited till the end of his first week of training. A day of rest had been earned, and Raymond knew he could get away without being noticed. Biggs had already told him about the location of Windchaser's lair. The craggy rise was a good distance away. Traveling on foot was definitely out. Not only would it take longer than a day to get there and back, but Raymond's escape could be tracked. The Skybacks out for a morning flight would spot him easily. Raymond decided to stow away in a supply wagon departing at dawn. He had learned the wagon's route a day earlier and knew it would take him close enough to the mountains in the east. He hid in the wagon and tried to remain quiet as possible. After a few hours of bumps and jostles, Raymond peeked out from beneath the canvas curtain covering the wagon's cargo. He was almost there. When the wagon finally made the turn, bringing it closest to the mountains, Raymond clutched the small bag he had loaded with supplies. After taking a deep breath, he jumped from the wagon and rolled, forcing his body to relax and absorb the jarring impact. When he finished his roll, he sat up, dusting himself off, and surveyed the foothills of the mountains. They looked to him like two opposing stone giants, but Raymond remained determined as ever as he rose to his feet. Slinging his bag over his shoulder, he began his long hike. After a time, he approached a narrow pass between the craggy sentinels. The walkway was covered in shadow and very dark, despite the afternoon sun. It took Raymond longer than he would have liked to navigate the treacherous length. Several times he put his foot forward and found it resting on nothing but empty air. They were drops he feared might have deposited him into the world below, or at least into a pit from which he would not escape. Turning a corner, he finally saw a patch of brilliance. It quickly emerged into a stone lip overlooking the churning canal. Raymond had learned that Dinotopians often took canoe rides along this canal. With any luck, a canoe would be left on the one side of the channel. Luck, it seemed, was with him today. Raymond took the canoe out. At first, he was relieved to be floating carefree in the cool, choppy waters. Then suddenly, as if in response to Raymond's challenge, something leaped up from the fast current, a large black stone, the size of Bix. When Raymond looked again, he realized his mistake. The stone had not moved. It had simply come into view unexpectedly as the canoe dropped from the crest and slammed down towards the stationary rock. With a cry, Raymond leaped overboard an instant before the canoe could strike the rock. The water was ice cold, and he immediately felt for some anchor so he would not be swept downstream. His hands found a twisting branch as the lightning canoe slid past the slick surface of the stone, missing it by a matter of inches. Letting go of the branch, Raymond let the current sweep him towards the canoe. Quickly he climbed back into the wooden sanctuary and continued his journey. Water spraying his face, he saw alligators on the shore eyeing him quizzically as he navigated around several obstructions. Finally, high above, he saw what he had been searching for, a mountainous rise shaped like a claw. He nearly howled in triumph as he fought to bring the canoe to shore. Raymond had begun his journey skyward using the climbing tools he borrowed from the camp. He had gone 30 feet up when his teeth started chattering. Raymond hated to stop, but he knew the consequences of forging ahead in such a state. After dropping to a ledge, he stripped off his clothing and laid them out in the sun to dry. He learned that much by helping his father. When his body temperature dropped too much, the cold could become deadly. Dr. Wiltz had treated many a poor souls who ignored their own body's warnings. Finally, after 30 minutes or so, Raymond dressed in his newly dry clothes and resumed his ascent. "Now we're getting somewhere," Raymond said, mindful to take his time and always check his strength of the handholds. His father had taught him this as well, on one of their outings. Raymond was halfway to his destination when impatience set in. Sweat poured into his eyes. Grabbing a hold of the next ledge, he hauled himself up without testing at first if the ledge could hold his weight. There was a sharp crack, and suddenly Raymond found himself pitched backwards, his arms pinwheeled. He tried to find something to grab, but his hands clasped empty air and his feet slid from the rocks. A second later he was falling. The ground reached up for Raymond, anxious to welcome him back. It all happened so fast, he hadn't even managed to scream. Suddenly, a shape crowded into his tunneling vision. A field of amber, blue, and green surrounded him. He struck, but it was not with stone which he connected. Instead, he felt something tough and leathery, yet comfortably pliant beneath him. The wind reached down and rustled his hair. The descent had ended. Unbelievably, he was on the rise once again. With a gasp, he raised his head. He found himself looking down the long, graceful neck, towards the top beak longer than his entire body. It was Windchaser. The Skybacks had saved him. He felt himself beginning to slide, but his body remembered Hikaru's lessons. He compensated with his weight, then reached out and grabbed hold of Skybax's wings. The creature seemed shaky. The two rose and fell, gaining heights as they arched around. Raymond felt as if he might become dizzy. The great stone claw of the mountain loomed up before them. The Skybacks halted suddenly and pitched Raymond forward. He tumbled through the empty air for the briefest of moments, then rolled onto a ledge until he came to a stop. Laughter erupted from Raymond. Forgetting his near-fatal fall, he was overjoyed by his ride. He had done it! He had flown on a Windchaser! Bareback, no less! Turning, he saw Windchaser descend, blotting out the sun. The Skyback's wings seemed to glow in impossible fire. Then they lowered, and the harsh glare of daylight was once again in Raymond's eyes. Hello, Raymond said. The Skybacks let out a squall that hurts Raymond's ears. He winced at the painful sound, and the Skyback stopped suddenly. You saved my life, Raymond said, sensing Windchaser's barely contained anger. Again, the hateful squall. The Skyback flapped his wings as if it might depart at any moment. The displaced air caused Raymond to stumble back. Windchaser advanced on the boy he had saved, flapping his wings with quiet menace. Raymond swallowed nervously, not sure what to do. He had turned his face from the Skybacks and found himself looking into the cavern that Windchaser called home. The flapping of wings stopped suddenly. Raymond's eyes quickly adjusted to the near darkness. He saw a crude painting on the wall of a young man's smiling face. It was a picture of Daniel, Windchaser's lost rider. All about the cavern were reminders of Windchaser's loss. Raymond saw a backpack, an empty uniform, a cracked helmet, half-charged scrolls, a cup and saucer, a ball used for catching, and a sparkling clear stone hanging from a broken chain. Raymond guessed that all these items belonged to Daniel. The rest of the cavern was bare. I've lost someone too, Raymond said without turning. And he meant everything to me. I know what that feels like. Silence. Finally Raymond turned, worried he would find the Skybacks long gone. But Windchaser was not gone. He was still there, watching Raymond with an odd stare. Raymond dropped to one knee and fished out the pocket watch from his boot. He set it down beneath the crystal droplet. This was his. I'd like to keep it here, if that's all right. Windchaser voiced no objection. You know the worst of it? Raymond asked, surprised at the tears welling in his eyes. There are days when I hate him for going away. It sounds strange, I'll admit. My father didn't ask to be killed. It wasn't his fault. He didn't want to be taken away, and I would give anything to have him back. But sometimes, more than that, just sad. Sometimes I'm so angry. The Skybacks let out a mournful wail. Yes, Raymond said. In some impossible way, the sound made by the Skybacks was a perfect expression of the pain and confusion in his own soul. Suddenly a noise came from the mouth of the cavern. Someone dropped a rope from above. A figure descended upon the rope and called out. Raymond! With an angry cry, Windchaser whirled. Though the figure was a silhouette, Raymond knew the voice all too well. Hugh, he said hoarsely. The Skybacks headed towards Hugh with a remarkable speed. Hugh started to climb up the rope and was nearly out of the way when the Skybacks ripped past him and sailed over the cliff's edge. Windchaser! Raymond cried, but the Skybacks did not return. Hugh dropped back into the mouth of the cavern. He approached Raymond, who met him halfway. What are you doing here? Raymond asked angrily. Didn't you think anyone would miss you? Bix and me were worried that you would get yourself killed. She figured out where you must have been going. Raymond nodded, calming down. He looked towards the rope. There's an easier way of finding this place, Hugh said. Bix tried to make it sound impossible to keep you from trying it. She was trying to protect you. Raymond walked to the ledge of the cavern and looked up. The Skyback circled overhead a few times and flew off. Well, we'd better go, Hugh said. My path may be shorter and less dangerous, but it'll still take us time to get back. Hugh watched as disappointment enshrouded his friend. He was sorry about that, but he told himself he was acting in Raymond's best interest. Still, a part of him knew the truth. Part of Hugh was secretly pleased that he'd come between Raymond and the Skybacks. Another part of him, however, was ashamed at what he had done. Hugh looked around and noticed the odd shrine the Skybacks had created with items from the rider he lost. It reminded Hugh of that doll he had almost taken from the girl in Waterfall City. Anger suddenly flooded him. At times he seemed all of Dinotopia was constructed for the sole purpose of making him feel like a complete rotter. He had been right to come and try to save Raymond from his own foolishness. And look at the thanks he was given. Hugh whirled on Raymond, about to chastise his friend for acting so sullen and ungrateful. He stopped when he saw the same profound loss in his friend's eyes that he'd seen the first night that Raymond knew his father was dead. "Come on," Hugh said softly. "Maybe if we stay out in the open for a time, he'll come back." "You think?" Raymond asked. "Anything's possible," Hugh said, not really believing it. "Anything at all." Raymond was in no mood for sleep when he returned to the dormitory. His mind was racing. His body, however, was exhausted, and he fell asleep quickly. He dreamed of flying bareback on Windchaser, soaring over forgotten lands. Without warning, the dream transformed into a nightmare. Raymond found himself flying through a terrible storm. Looking beyond a magnificent stretch of the Skyback's wings, he saw the prison ship Redemption below. His father was on the bridge, fighting for his life. The bearded man, who had claimed the honor of killing the elder Welks, was struggling to push his father closer and closer to the ship's rails. Raymond screamed. His cry joined that of the Skybacks. Vaulting awake, Raymond heard Windchaser's distinctive cry. Was he still dreaming? He looked around. None of the other students were stirring. Even Hugh was still sound asleep. Odd that no one was disturbed by the sound. It must have come from his dream. Going outside, it would be pointless. On the other hand, Raymond knew he would never go back to sleep until he was certain. After slipping from his warm bed, Raymond hurried out of the dormitory. The night was a bit chilly, but Raymond was only aware of the strange hissing of his office to his right. He followed the sound until it came to a clearing. Suddenly he heard massive wings beating in the darkness. Looking up, he saw Windchaser above, gliding close for a landing. The Skybacks opened his beak, and a strange whisper came from the creature. The sound was repeated several times until Raymond was certain the Skyback was calling his name. Impossible! Solus explained that no Skyback spoke the conventional language. There was a distinctive understanding between a Skyback and a rider. In all the years Saurians had existed in Dinotopia, no Skybacks had ever displayed an ability to speak either Saurian or human language. Exactly how they communicated remained one of the island's greatest mysteries. "Raymond," Windchaser said as he cruised the ground. "Raymond." Now Raymond knew he was dreaming, and yet part of him was certain he was wide awake. This was real. It was happening. "I just wanted to sound like my name," Raymond said, refusing to believe his senses. "Stubborn," Windchaser said, now on his feet. Raymond's heart leaped into his throat. "Did you just say what I think you said?" Windchaser cocked his huge head slightly to one side as if to say, "What do you think?" "Oh my," Raymond muttered. "You do understand me." Windchaser brought his massive wings together several times, applauding his young, confused friend. Raymond was not exactly certain if the applause was meant to be a genuine congratulation or if the Skybacks was teasing him. He suspected the latter. "Am I the first one you've spoken to?" Raymond asked. Windchaser lowered his gaze and looked away. "It was Daniel, wasn't it?" Raymond tried. The Skybacks whirled its head in Raymond's direction. "He taught you," said Raymond. Standing on his haunches, Windchaser fixed Raymond with a scornful gaze. "No," Raymond said, understanding. "I suppose it was the other way around." Windchaser nodded his head. "Learn fast." Raymond smiled. "I like to think so." "Him," Windchaser said. "Not you." Clearing his throat, Raymond said, "I'll keep that in mind." An odd racking sound came from Skybacks. At first, Raymond thought the creature was sick. He was about to call for help when it occurred to him that Windchaser was laughing. "So that's why you came tonight?" Raymond asked, amazed at how quickly he was adjusting to the notion of a talking Skybacks. "To make fun of me?" Windchaser shrugged his wings, causing a slight breeze to kick up. "I bet you're lonely," Raymond said. "I know I am." Lowering his head slightly, Windchaser made an odd sound. The trilling that came from the skyback seemed to be composed of several different sounds at once. How could such a thing be possible? He's speaking to me in his language, Raymond thought. Windchaser's notes changed, becoming a complex series of musical movements. With such a marvelous complex sounds, Raymond could almost picture Windchaser and his fellow skybacks as performing a formal recital in the great London Hall. What is it that you're trying to say to me? Raymond asked. The skybacks fell silent, then said, Lonely. I am, too. Have you spoken with anyone except me and Daniel? Raymond asked. Windchaser shook his head. Though he could speak the human language, the process was clearly difficult for him. Do all the skybacks understand us, or just you? The magnificent winged creature gave no indication that he could answer this question. You have an amazing gift, Raymond said. Why don't you share it? Why don't you let everyone know? You're special. I bet there's never been a skybacks like you. Maybe there'll never be one again. Windchaser shook himself violently. He clearly rebelled at the very thought of sharing his gift with anyone except Raymond. You, Windchaser said. Others not. The skybacks beat his wings, preparing to run forward and lift himself into the air. Raymond was seized by sudden panic. He could not let Windchaser leave like this. Wait, please! I won't tell anyone, I promise. The skybacks looked at him suspiciously. Not other boy? Hugh? No, I won't tell him. I won't tell anyone. Please, you've got to believe me. The skyback settled down. Raymond did his best to calm himself. It was clear that Windchaser's bond with his previous rider had been so strong that the skybacks had been overcome all barriers separating them. Raymond had to somehow prove himself to the skybacks, that he was worthy of the same. Teach me your language, Raymond said. The skybacks stared in thought for a few moments longer, then nodded in agreement. Windchaser made a sound for Raymond. The boy tried to duplicate it, but failed. He tried again, then again, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not. Windchaser shook his head. They made several more attempts. This time, the skybacks tried another sounds, simpler ones. Raymond concentrated and was finally able to mimic a few of them. So, what does that mean? Raymond asked, repeating this short string of notes. Tell me, please. Soul has what body lacks, Windchaser said. I don't understand, Raymond said. Watch. The skybacks ran a short distance, unfurled its wings, and leaped into the air. He glided swiftly by, then passed back again. The breeze from his wings was sweet to Raymond because it came with an understanding. Those words were a simple riddle. What does a human soul have that an earthbound body lacks? Wings! Raymond shouted. With a cry of triumph, Windchaser descended to the ground and continued the lessons afresh. The skyback seemed amused. Once again, he would have the opportunity to train a human. Chapter 11. Well, Vic said, I heard about your little adventure. I'm relieved to see you in one piece. Raymond shuffled uneasily. The morning had been spent participating in a weekly celebration for new inductees. In the afternoon, he had transferred his belongings to the second phase of Skyback's camp, the Golden Buildings. After the introductory speech by Hikaru, who would follow the students through the 3 stages of the camp, Raymond was allowed several more hours of liberty. He found Bix with the cleanup crew in the central fairgrounds. I found him, Raymond told Bix. I found Windchaser. So Hugh told me. Raymond nodded. He was not surprised his friend had kept their adventure from everyone except the Protoceratops. Bix, I need to make him understand. Understand what? She asked patiently. That things can get better. Bix stared intently at Raymond, then gave her blessing to his enterprise. In the process of helping him, you may well heal yourself. I don't understand. You don't have to. Follow your heart, and all will be well. She looked up. Why don't you invite him to help us? Raymond was startled. He glanced at the sky and saw Windchaser circling above. Waving his hands, Raymond signaled to his friend to come down. Raymond honestly didn't think Windchaser would accept his invitation. But to Raymond's surprise, the Skybox was soon cruising to the ground. Several people and dinosaurs cleared of the area uneasily. They looked at Bix for guidance. The sight of the small Protoceratops standing firm helped prevent panic. Windchaser joined the humans and saurians in their task of clearing the ground. Raymond was with him constantly. Together they picked up debris and deposited it in a nearby cart. After about an hour, the Skybox and Ryder came to the camp to deliver a message. Windchaser abandoned the cleanup duty and went over to the other Skybox. Raymond watched the odd interplay between Windchaser and the messenger. At first, they seemed to be having a heated exchange. Then Windchaser turned and flew off. Raymond ran from the fairgrounds, following the Skybox from below. At the edge of camp, Windchaser suddenly changed course. He circled directly above Raymond a few times, and then landed close by. Rushing forward, Raymond wrapped his arms around Windchaser's head and soothingly caressed the clearly agitated creature. Both of them looked around to ensure they were not observed. "What is it?" Raymond asked, his heart thundering. "What did the Skybox say?" "Begin to train again. Join with others." Windchaser suddenly turned away. "Afraid." "Don't be," Raymond said brightly. "I know just how we can start." As evening came, many of the children were playing games in the fairgrounds. Raymond went to Kakaru, who was teaching them a Japanese rhyme. "Honorable teacher," Raymond said, "I have a friend who would like to join in the games. May he?" "Of course." Turning, Raymond hollered, "Windchaser!" The children froze as the Skyback emerged from his hiding place behind one of the tents in the fairgrounds. Hikaru looked as if he might raise an objection at any moment, but he remained silent. He watched closely as the Skybacks approached. "Let us see," Hikaru said as he crossed his arms over his chest. "What game could your friend play with the others? He's a shade larger than any of they are." Before Raymond could say anything, one of the children approached Windchaser. The young boy gently stroked the Skyback's head. A trilling sound expressed Windchaser's pleasure. He bent lower and was taken completely by surprise when the child leapt onto his neck. Startled, the Skybox raised his head, lifting the child high into the air. Raymond was terrified that the sudden movement from Windchaser would set the boy flying. Instead, the child slid down Windchaser's back. He laughed, then cried out in delight as he hit the ground. Windchaser looked towards the other children. They were all lining up for their turns. On the edge of the fairgrounds, Bix and Hugh watched in amazement as the Skybox became a saurian slide. Windchaser was clearly pleased. He suddenly let out a call that sounded like a chorus of flutes. Everyone waited for several tense moments until the call was answered. A single reply. 2 more. In a few minutes, 3 other Skyboxes appeared. At first, Windchaser was shy in their presence. Then the games began again, and Windchaser was in the thick of things, playing and enjoying himself. "And here I thought he was a bleeding monster," Hugh said. Even Hugh's heart was lightened by the sight. Then, suddenly, Hugh's mood began to change as a frightening feeling of loss crept over him. "Hugh," Bix said, sensing the change in the boy, "Raymond will always be your friend. Perhaps Windchaser could be as well. After all, you and the Skyback seem to have a lot in common." "In common? What do we have in common?" asked Hugh, but Bix said nothing more. She simply wandered off, leaving Hugh to ponder his own question. The next day, Hugh was relieved to have some time away from his normal chores at camp. Besides Raymond and Bix, Hugh had made no real friends here. That had not been the fault of the Dinotopians. The other Skybox handlers had been quite friendly to Hugh. There had been none of the coolness he feared. He'd been treated just like anyone else, despite being a newcomer. So why didn't he feel like everyone else? With a sigh, he tried not to think about this. Instead, he gazed at his surroundings. This morning, he'd been assigned to what he considered guard duty. He was happy. It was very easy work. No work at all, actually. His task was simply to watch the high wire. The high wire had been strung between 2 tall plate platforms and located in a field off to the west of the final training area. Here students could get used to heights and hone their balance on lines. This morning, the safety nets below had been removed for repair. For the next 3 days, the area would be a hazard. Hugh's job was to keep watch and make sure no one wandered into the dangerous area. He scanned the bright, cheery open field and was relieved to see no one in sight. He had no timepiece except for the sun and the sky. After close to 2 hours of pacing and sitting, sitting and pacing, he began to dislike the simple assignment. How much longer was he on duty anyway? Would they leave him here for hours with no one to keep him occupied except for his own thoughts? That might prove dangerous. An urge he had resisted for days came upon him. Muttering a curse, Hugh reached into the pockets of his pants and withdrew the crumpled sheet of paper. Memories flooded back as he unfolded the brittle page and stared at the writing. The secret for turning base metal into gold. In the outside world, such knowledge would make him a god among men. In Dinotopia, it made him no one special. "Come on, O'Donovan, throw it away," he told himself. "You can do it. It's bloody well not going to get you any good here. And there's no sure way off this island. Not unless—" He shuddered. Not unless they were lying to him. "Now you're really going around the bend, old friend. You're even talking to yourself like something on the page of a bloody Yank dime novel." Hugh felt ashamed of his own thoughts. Nevertheless, all this friendliness and openness frightened him terribly. He was used to thinking of the world as divided between two kinds of people, those who made up the rules and those who followed them, and he knew exactly where people like him belonged in the grand division of things, slipping right between the cracks. Suddenly he was startled from his thoughts by a shrill scream. He spun, was searching the grounds. Who had cried out? He saw no one. Then he shifted his gaze upward. He saw a boy dangling from the high wire. If the boy fell, it would be 50 feet straight down. He wouldn't have a chance. Hugh raised the horn he began to call for help. A loud, rich sound came from it as he ran towards the high wire. Abandoning the horn, Hugh leaped for the highest rung he could reach in the high wire's northern ladder. "Hang on!" he cried. His heart thundered and his every nerve was on fire. How could those Dinotopians have been so stupid? There were too many directions from which a stray boy or girl could wander into this area. There should have been a fence, he thought angrily. Why did they put him, of all people, on this duty? They should have known better. "No," he suddenly demanded of himself. "Stop making excuses." "Help me, please!" cried the boy hanging from the wire. Hugh raced up to the platform, praying he would get there in time. Chapter 12. Hugh was relieved to see the child holding on with both arms circling the wire. The boy's face was pale, his features twisted into a fearful mask. "You're going to be all right," Hugh said, suddenly feeling wobbly as he looked down. "The boy needs solid ground, not your stupid words," he thought. "Help him." Drawing a steady breath, Hugh took in the situation. The boy was 6 feet out into the wire, too far for Hugh to simply extend a hand and pull him back. How on earth was he going to save the boy? Suddenly, a squall sounded from above. He glanced upward and saw a skyback circling near the sun. "Yes! Come help us!" Hugh cried. He tried to catch sight of the skybacks again, but the sun's glare blinded him. He looked away, rubbing his eyes as fireworks seemed to dance before his visions. Then he scanned the sky again. He saw nothing. Where did that skybacks go? "I'm scared!" the boy shouted. "So am I," thought Hugh. He had to think of something fast. The child looked as if he might lose his grip at any moment now. Seconds ticked by, and Hugh felt frozen in his tracks, completely useless. Finally, an idea came to him. Maybe he should allow himself to dangle from the line. Then he could move forward towards the boy by climbing hand over hand. The boy could cling to Hugh's neck as he took them back. Hugh froze again. What if the added tension on the line caused a vibration? That could make the boy lose his hold. Blood and thunder! The boy might come down no matter what he did. But he had to try something. "I'm slipping!" the child screamed. "Just hold on!" Hugh snarled impatiently, immediately regretting his harsh tone. "I'll save you! I will!" Hugh crouched down and tried to reach out for the wire. His hands were trembling, and he could not make himself take the line. "Do it," he thought. "You have to!" The tips of his fingers touched the wire in time to feel it vibrate in his hands. He heard a scream. The boy had fallen. He watched impossibly fast descent and was amazed the child wasn't screaming. Had he passed out? "Don't look, don't look," a voice inside Hugh warned, but he could not tear his gaze away. A sudden gust of wind struck him and nearly blew him off the platform. The skyback dove towards the ground at an impossible speed. The boy was perhaps 15 feet from disaster when the skyback swept under him. He scooped him up, breaking his fall. Hugh cheered as the Skyback sailed a few hundred feet, then glided to a landing. It gently deposited the fallen child on the ground. A group of people raced towards the child and his rescuer. Hugh's burst of happiness was over in a heartbeat as he remembered his own failure. With a heavy heart, he began to climb down to the ground. He did not see Windchaser circling the area above, and watched everything with keen interest. Much later, Raymond found Hugh in a secluded area almost a mile from camp. The older boy sat at the edge of the small pond. "How did you know where to look?" Hugh asked. "The Skyback's right. I saw you heading this way. I had a feeling you wouldn't go too far." "Why did you bother? Haven't you heard what I did? I was too much of a coward to save that boy." Raymond sat beside his friend. "But the boy was saved." "People here know I was a troublemaker. Now they must think I'm a worthless coward. I don't belong here, and this just proves it." "That's not true at all," Raymond began. "But it is!" Hugh interrupted as he withdrew his crumpled sheet of parchment from his pocket and handed it to his friends. "I never want to see this again." Raymond saw the formula on the page. "This again." "Yes," Hugh said. "If I hadn't been daydreaming about how rich and powerful those symbols would make me in the real world, none of this would have happened. Just goes to show, some people don't deserve what trust they're given." "Why are you so unhappy here?" Raymond asked. "Because I don't belong in Dinotopia. For a time I held a speck of hope that somehow I could fit in here, but I was wrong. Hope is the enemy back where I'm from. That's what they say. Those who sit on the ground on the street dreaming that things will get better are more likely to be hit by a wagon." Raymond shook his head. "You're wrong, Hugh. Hope matters. Trying matters." Hugh could not look his eye in the friend. "You don't understand. I thought Dinotopia was different, and it is. But I'm not. What happened today proved that. I'm sorry, Raymond, but I'm not good enough for this place. The dolphins made a mistake. They should have left me to drown." A rustling sound came from a nearby cluster of trees. Vic suddenly stepped forward. She had been listening all along. "I beg to differ," she broke in. "You saved Raymond's life." "But that was different," Hugh said, not surprised at all by Vic's sudden appearance. By now Hugh had gotten used to Dinotopians appearing almost magically out of thin air. "How was saving Raymond different?" Vix asked. "I didn't have any time to think about that. The storm was raging, daggers and cutlasses were flying. I just did it. This time I had to make a decision. Put myself at risk, or let someone else die. And I couldn't do it. If that Skybax and his rider hadn't rescued the boy, you would have been killed." Vix shook her head. "You would not be so hard on yourself. There were always second chances, especially on Dinotopia." "Second chances? Not for people like me," Hugh said, turning from his friend and walking away. Raymond started to go after him. "Don't," Vic said. "Hugh needs some time alone. He'll be fine." Raymond watched Hugh's departing form and wished he could believe that. The next day, a celebration was held to honor the bravery of Skybax and the rider who saved the young boy. Hugh was there, but he watched only from the edge of the fairground. He was half hidden behind a large tree, well beyond the crowds. In his mind, the coolness he had expected from the Dinotopians had finally arrived. He'd been taken off guard duty for good. Hugh knew it was nothing less than he deserved. Why should they trust him to fail again? He dreaded the looks he sometimes got from people he'd come to admire. Ray claimed it was all in Hugh's own mind, but Hugh believed he knew people better than Raymond did. All his life Hugh had been nothing more than a gutter rat. Being loathed was part and parcel of his former existence. If only the Dinotopians had hated Hugh, then he would know what to do. Hate right back. But this was far worse. They didn't hate him. They pitied him. He just knew it. The sidelong glances they gave him seemed to say, "He can't help himself. He's just a worthless dolphinback." "Yeah," he thought, "and a coward." There was one thing clear to Hugh. He didn't deserve friends like Raymond and Bix. Come nightfall, he was going to leave Skyback's camp. Backing away, Hugh heard a sharp cry. He spun and saw he'd stepped on the foot of a girl. She was about his own age and quite pretty, with short black hair and Asian features. She smiled broadly. For a moment, Hugh found himself staring at the color of her eyes. Chiding himself, he downturned his gaze, muttered an apology, and started to walk away. "Oh, so that's how it is," she said. "Step on my toes, then act as if I meant nothing to you. I swear, boys on this island are all the same. Hugh stopped abruptly and took another look at the young woman. There was something different about her. Are you Hikiro's daughter? Ha! She said. He's Japanese. I'm Chinese. Big difference. Sorry. No need. I just didn't want to miss my chance to meet the terrible Hugh O'Donovan. Terrible, he said. I suppose that I am. She frowned. I was teasing you. You know, joking. She looked him up and down. It is as I was told. You're all too serious. You must learn to have more fun in life. Oh? You wondered who this girl was. You have me at a disadvantage. You mean I know your name and you don't know mine. Leanne. A pleasure, he said, bending slightly. He resisted the urge to kiss her hand, as he might have done back in London. She looked as if he knew what she was about to do. She seemed disappointed when he did not follow his instincts. I'm so happy to finally meet a dolphin back, she said. I love the Dinotopians, but that's not the same as a newcomer like you. Really? He asked. Do you know I'm considered a troublemaker? Of course. That's why I wanted to meet you. Mind you, I've created my fair share of mischief, too. I'm leaving camp today, but I hope to see you again. You do? He asked, with happy disbelief. Sure, she said. Why not? Hugh paused a moment, then looked away. See that boy? He asked, indicating the child standing in the center of the stage at the fairground. The skybacks of the rider who saved him stood on his right. If that skybacks and rider hadn't arrived when they did, that child wouldn't be alive right now. I know all about it, Leanne said, eyeing Hugh carefully. Hugh was about to say something when Leanne spoke again. Will you do something for me? Maybe. It won't be difficult, I promise. I will tell you to look to the future, but first you must accept the present, said Leon. I don't understand. Close your eyes. Don't argue, she said. Sighing, Hugh did as he was told. Now don't say anything, Leanne whispered into his ear. Just listen. Be calm. Take it all in. The heat upon your face, the soft breeze, the sound of the crowd. Listen. Hugh wondered what magic this young woman possessed. He obeyed her every command. Breathe deep, she said softly. Seek peace. For the first time since the near accident, Hugh felt calm. He heard the distinctive cry of a skybax in the distance. His mind reached back to the high water. He had heard a skybax then, too. It had been circling above, and then it had vanished. It had vanished for a long time, now that he thought about it. Several minutes had ticked by before the skybax dived down to save the falling child. The cry of a skybax came on stage again. Suddenly, Hugh understood the mistake he had made. His eyes flashed open. Leanne! She was no longer beside him. Jasmine, the frederick she had worn, lingered in the air. Of the young woman herself, there was no trace. Hugh had no time to worry about Leanne's magical disappearance. He had something more important to deal with. As the ceremony proceeded, Hugh cut through the crowd and found Raymond. There were 2 skybaxes, Hugh said. Raymond looked at him strangely. Pardon? When I was first on the platform, I heard a skybax. I looked up and saw one circling. Then it was gone. I don't see... Windchaser! The skybax I heard the first time sounded nothing like the one that saved the boy. Listen to it. Raymond nodded and listened to the call made by the skybax on the stage. He doesn't sound a bit like Windchaser. That's right, but I was thinking about this before. Windchaser must have been worried he couldn't fly well enough to save the child on his own, and he went and got help. Raymond shook his head in wonder. I can understand why I'm not being honored, Hugh said, but Windchaser should be. That skybax and rider didn't just show up. Windchaser brought them. Stunned, Raymond swore he would help Hugh reveal the truth. Together they made their way through the crowd and found Hikaru, who was standing close to the stage. He listened as Hugh spoke. Yes, we know all about this, Hikaru said, as he took the boys aside. Those honors were offered to Windchaser. He refused them. Why? Raymond asked. I don't know, Hikaru said. When I saw him playing with the children, I was encouraged. I thought he might be finding new acceptance of his new life. Now, I'm not so certain. Hikaru was called back to the ceremony. Raymond and Hugh watched the conclusion of the honors. This isn't right, Hugh said. Raymond nodded. No, it isn't. What do you think we should do about it? The only thing we can do, Raymond said. Talk to Windchaser.